Although Chiniese Three Body problem has been satirically referred to as old rogue literature because it repeatedly made women a villain and praised a stereotype carrier full of male gaze Zhuangyan as a goddess, I still believe that three body problem has extremely important strategic significance in studying gender contradictions, especially in anti-masculinity. Here we may say something the feminists don't like: gender contradictions should focus on studying masculinity rather than feminism. There are three reasons. First, the birth of males marks the birth of gender. On the basis of sexual reproductive exchange of genetic material, males degenerate their gestation function and leave this function to other living individuals for their own purposes. Therefore, they do not need to consider the damage caused to their own body by birth. Therefore, the greater the proportion of male groups in the total energy of the population, the more unfavorable the continuation of the population. Second, masculinistal power has a deeper and solid material foundation than feminist rights, and has a profound and even source-based fundamental impact on human class culture, which is very convenient to study. Third, and most important point, masculinistal power anti-Marxism-Leninism is not only the anti-Marxism-Leninism seeking truth from facts but also the great ideal of anti-Marxism-Leninism to liberate all mankind. Regarding the first point, we can summarize the characteristics of this degenerative evolution of male birth. Biological individuals degenerate a more energy-consuming physiological function in exchange for a lower difficulty of survival, but genes continue to require the product of this physiological function, so this group of degenerates must rely on the undegenerated person to complete their life process. For those who have fertilized degenerate functions, this degeneration actually accomplishes the merger of the two major goals of survival and reproduction. As nurturing prostitutes, they can use a certain or even some individuals to contribute energy to their future gene continuation and make the utilized animal weak and unable to invest in the competition for survival resources with higher enthusiasm, which is also beneficial to the current gene continuation of those with degenerate functions. That is why males generally have higher enthusiasm for reproduction. The analogy of the fish who drains the sea in the three-body problem is very suitable for intuitively demonstrating the relationship between male and female sex and the entire race continuation. Classical evolutionary theory believes that life originates from the ocean, and we can use water to symbolize the resources needed for survival. Because the difficulty of reproduction of species is closely related to the amount of energy obtained in the ecological niche where the species is located, we compare pregnancy to a process that must be limited to water, and all physiological processes of organisms require water. Males do not have the task of fertilizing, and their existence will inevitably constitute a resource competition with the fertilizer and their offspring. Therefore, the more energy they occupy in the entire population life cycle, including but not limited to the larger the size and longer the lifespan the male have to the female, the more unfavorable it will be for the continuation of the entire population. That is, the lifespan, body size and number of males are more strictly related to the shortage of resources available for nurturing by the population in the ecological niche, just like only a wealthy family can raise playboys who is arrogant and extravagant. Those living in tight-padded life either do not have males, such as autologous organisms, or males are very small and cannot even live alone without females, such as Ostax, Bonellia viridis, Dinophilus gyrociliatus Schmidt, and male Lophius americanus involved in reproduction. In short, this evolutionary model formed by degeneration is the crystallization of animal nature. The stronger the animal nature, the more it harms others and benefits oneself. However, as a part of the entire ecosystem, this arrogant animal nature that is self-respecting cannot be hyped up, but is always subject to the causal relationship of energy flow, and sways with the water and cannot be kept alone, as if it is inseparable from the fish in rivers, lakes and seas. For example, due to the deterioration of sports performance, the male hippocampus is unable to avoid enemies, and regaining the degraded gestation function that should have been degraded to improve population survival. But as evolution continues, there will always be a day when the biodiversity is high enough and the food chain is complex to a certain extent, so that the ecosystem has strong self-repairability and stability to carry such a creature. The size, number, and lifespan of males in the population is almost the same as that of females or even higher than that of females. This is what we ourselves are as human beings. In summary, we have to face the fundamental fact that the gender system itself is inequality, and this inequality does not simply come from strength but from mechanisms. Men always show their strength and power to suppress women's proposals to fight for their own rights and interests, and to associate strength with males, which itself is contrary to the fact-seeking Marxism-Leninism. And where does their strength ultimately come from? Through degeneration, males hand over the burden and cost that they bring to the body to the females, and use the numerical advantages obtained from this to use in the survival competition with female individuals, further weakening the opponent and thus strengthening themselves, presenting a cycle of gain values through mechanics and stabilize mechanics through values, and laying the foundation for the pattern of the male is always strong and the female is always weak. Species with such energy flow patterns will naturally establish a social structure similar to that of a pattern. It can be described as some individuals in the group degenerate a certain function and separate them from the undegraded group A. Here degenerates are classified as group B. They reduce their survival difficulty because they do not have to bear the consumption brought to the body by the function, and have been widely present. However, A and B are both in urgent need of the product of this function, so B relies on A. A bears the loss that B does not have to bear because of the performance. The more products it produces, the more losses it will be. The greater the gap between A and B in terms of acquisition/output ratio, thus forming a pattern similar to A is like mother, B is like fetus. The more the fetus gets from mother, the weaker the mother becomes. If B gains overwhelming power through this mechanism, then when A and B face competition for limited resources, B can use overwhelming power to obtain priority distribution rights for resources and then dominate A. Therefore, the more things it produces and creates, the greater the opposition it faces. Driven by the instinct of seeking profit and avoiding harm, B showed an increasingly greedy and embezzled attitude in the process of allocating the value of demand produced by A. Correspondingly, A showed an increasingly regressive and avoiding tendency in the production of value of demand, and the conflict between the two sides became more intense, and perhaps the tighter the binding. Whether it is the micro-to-macro game between male and female, or the changes and iterations of social class contradictions, it suits this classification very much. From this we can see that capital and masculinity must be closely linked. The concept of capital, which continuously reduces costs and realizes benefits in order to proliferate as quickly and in large quantities as possible, is the same as the degenerate evolution principle of the birth of males. If you think this conclusion is too outrageous, then look at real life. In the context of the cyclical economic crisis of capitalism, are men more willing to fight capital, or do they firmly believe women's work efficiency is not as good as men, and the workplace is not where women should come, to exclude proletarian women so that men can get the advantage of applying for employment? Although they scold capital and feminist rights every day, the reason why they hate capital because feminist rights are simply that the consumer culture of capital has increased women's psychological expectations and expenses, making it impossible for men to gain the value of women with the smallest possible efforts. In other words, when it comes to making women devote themselves to their work with the smallest possible reward, masculinists and capital are exactly the same people. They will work together to squeeze women. Whether at work or in family, this is the source of different pay for equal work for women. This inequality continues to this day and has not ended. Therefore, masculinistal power will inevitably run contrary to the great ideal of Marxism-Leninism to liberate all mankind. As for the facts of masculinistal anti-Marxism-Leninism, we can think about the fallacy that equates feminism and individualism. Men always say that feminists emphasize that ingustation is individualism, exquisite selfishness. But the obvious fact is that urging women to get married and have children is beneficial to men. First of all, the energy consumption and discomfort caused by pregnancy will make women at a disadvantage in the competition with men, and have to retire to the family. Male applicants can use this to reduce the intensity of competition and gain the advantage of applying for the job. The redomestication of women will make them lose their channels and power to speak out in the public sphere. As husbands, men can, together with their families, sting women in family labor that is not protected by labor law, including forcing them to commit to mating without protective measures. And as wives, women who can only obtain living funds from their husbands are becoming more and more mute and cannot say anything about their suffering. So in the end, forcing a woman to have children is entirely a man who makes a profit through the blood and tears of women, and it stems from man's individualism and selfishness. As for the problems that masculinists always shout, such as high bride gifts, high marriage and love costs, they will only be more serious through the slogans that accelerate and version updates that imply that masculinists obtain supreme discourse power. Just look at history and you will know that when women's personal rights cannot be guaranteed, people know that the reward for having a daughter is far less than that of having a son, and that it is to work for families with sons. The process of abortion and killing a baby girl will be accelerated, so that the gender of men and women will rise step by step. In the end, in order to reduce losses, the atmosphere of giving wedding gifts will only be even more serious. In addition, the masculinistal clamors that deter public safety are such as 30 million bachelor warnings and the threat of unmarried and unborn every day. Where will they look for the marital maid providing sexual service? Look at the whole society's inertial fanaticism about having boys, considering the repeated bans of surrogacy institutions, considering the transnational marriage fever of opening your eyes to see the world. Just ask a question. Since masculinists are trying to obtain so-called sexual resources at a low price, then compared to keeping these foreign women's countries poor in wars, and maintaining the development difference with the man's motherland to ensure that sexual resources are cheap and easy to obtain, how much motivation the masculinists have to really liberate the world like a communist in order to make people everywhere live a prosperous and fast life. So masculinists are obviously stomping on imperialism and putting on the mask of justice like, I am a Marxist-Leninist. Lu Xun saw through their tricks 100 years ago. In the true story of Aq, when Aq thought of revolution, he planned to revenge and select girls as spoils of the war. He was purely jealous of the good life enjoyed by the old landlords, so he wanted to change the dynasty. Just like many male Reddit Mao today, if they express their strong desire for women and power, they may be disgusted and ridiculed. So they put on the mask of revolution and Marxian Leninism to gain people's trust, and it immediately works. To put it bluntly, they just use these words as waste cards and gold medals for avoiding death. If you criticize them for not having the style of Marxism-Leninism under the banner of Marxism-Leninism, for example, condemns them for supporting the legalization of prostitution and opposing severe punishment of surrogacy, they will behave like a hoodlum of Aq's bullying of the young nun. Since the monks can sexually harass nuns, why can't I? The politicians and wealthy businessmen who come and go to Virgin Island can't get the prostitute, why can't me? You are just trying to help women raise prices and materialize women. Then they throw a bunch of turtle men or boxing identity tags and they spread some well-known scandal about feminist, mixed with some unpleasant jokes of unknown origin, and finally laughed and cursed. Owing to women trigger the war will start because of feminist greed, but will not end because of their fear. Let's accelerate. Winning alone is better than losing both. The above is probably the type of masculinistal speech I have collected, which can probably summarize the psychological characteristics of masculinistalists. Compared with the liberation of all mankind, they care more about being a man who can dominate or even trample on the fate of women, and this is their bottom line. When you uncover the layers of disguises covering this bottom line, the violent deterrence they can't wait to show is the fundamental guarantee for ensuring that the masculinistal order lasts for so many years, and it is also the fundamental reason why masculinistism can grow so strong. Having got rid of the burden of gestation, the strength they gain by this mechanism can take the initiative in fighting for food and mating. The ecological niche in which they are located can almost guarantee that the gestation can successfully give birth to the child even if they eat leftovers of who have degraded the gestation function. What the male should consider is just how to seize more females. This is the reason why the masculinistal group is so strong, and it is also their greatest luck compared to women, not a disguised praise for embarking on a more difficult path, but don't having to becoming mothers who have worked hard. They can always be a child, asking for food and clamor to conquer everything, and measure everything based on their own interests and transform the world into what they need. It is not ridiculous to be a child. Even when a child has enough destructive power, his willfulness becomes an enviable and carefree manner. He can declare that everything in the world belongs to him and exchange it for submission and flattery by the rulers, and take the opportunity to imprint the virtues called dedication into the ruled souls. If you take a closer look at the image Zhuanyin that men like, you will know the clues. Lu Xun said, "Women are born with maternal and daughterly instincts, but not wifely instincts. The wifely role is imposed, a blend of motherhood and daughterhood." Zhuangyan obediently drank the wine handed by a strange man Luoji, and asked the wall-faced person who had never met before. It must be difficult for you. It corresponds to what Luo Ji said. Everything around can hurt her, but she never hurt anyone. Zhuang Yan is as ignorant as a cared young daughter, unaware of danger, and as tolerant of all potential enemies as a loving mother. This is undoubtedly stupid in the background of the dark forest of the three-body problem, as if exposing her heart waiting for a flying sharp knife to penetrate her chest at any time. This stupidity is definitely not out of nature. After all, is nature really natural? A strong enough life will transform nature into a favorable appearance for itself, just as the education masculinists carefully curated in history, which will product girls like Zhuangyan. Girls must be ignorant, obedient, and unaggressive enough, like the sweet spring water that can be easily stirred by swimming fish and drunk by beasts, obediently behave like a table of unmoved feasts for men to enjoy. In this way, studying feminism alone is a trap that can be overwhelmed, because suppressing women's rights is the content of masculinity. The reason can be summarized in an old saying by the slave owner to trained slaves: make the ruled stay hungry. Only when the level of material abundance is barely above or below the threshold of basic needs can the ruled not having high expectations, and they will not be like the women who have high expectations for their partner that masculinists hate today, and will they be grateful and obedient enough to be ruled. This is called Zhuang Yang's method of controlling people. It also shows how the gender relationship of male superiority and female inferiority becomes the source of hierarchy from material basis to behavioral psychology. So when masculinists see those who speak out for women's rights or hear women complaining about being persecuted by men, their attitude is not equal or helping their compatriots but more like slave owners seeing that the slaves have signs of resistance, so they hurriedly raise their sticks to scare the deterrent. If he is patient, he will generally be more gentle and indirect. Everyone is experiencing this, and it is always like this. If you talk about the historical fact that women are persecuted by men, his first reaction is that foreign objects are mixed in the language environment where they are located, so it need to be neutralized, so they hurry up and spit out a few more news that the man is persecuted by women, even if spreading rumors. If you say that a woman is not doing well, he will say that the man doesn't feel very happy either. If he has religious beliefs, he will bring out the supernatural existence of such powerful and indiscriminate orders as heaven or God or monsters, and declare in their name that women suffer such pain as the shackles they are born to bear. In short, women deserve to suffer and remain silent. This is a rule. There is a great resistance to breaking it. Although they are compatriots, they will not help, so don't mention it, it's useless. If there are onlookers who are both masculinistal, the suppression effect of this set of rhetoric will double. If the teller hasn't stopped talking at this point, or the masculinist has no patience at the beginning, he will enter the stage of direct deterrence. Similar to fighting with the other party in international negotiations, the masculinist will announce or directly remove some resources that the other party has or even attack the other party. If you say you are fearing men, he will say if you have way, you should not use invented and made by men. If you say a woman is oppressed, he will say this place is already very livable for women. Don't fail to appreciate what happiness really means while you are growing in happiness, or directly point to the door. Please find someone better qualified than me or somewhere better qualified than here. There are also people who threaten by, if you continue to say something like this, you will be sent to India. If you are still so disobedient, male workers will refuse to provide services to women. After all, we cannot tell who is a feminist. Drivers will refuse to give women a ride, and women will never be employed. This deterrence has been tried and done for thousands of years. The fundamental reason is that it hits the bottom code of humans as organisms and as gene carriers. Genes have the instinct to replicate infinitely, but the resources in the environment are limited. This is the same as the dark forest law of cosmic sociology in the three-body problem. Biology naturally hopes that other living organisms have greater survival pressure, referred to as not believing that others live better than themselves. Full of potential aggression towards others, people's desire to attack is generally higher for women, who are generally less able to resist than men, and the discriminatory perception of women are born inferior, women are femme fatale, women are harming the country. Consensus on the social dangers of women are just excuses for attacking and conditioned reflex slogans to guide the masses to attack. Therefore, the essence of masculinistal power is the flow of animal nature. The stronger the animal nature, the more harm others are. Because everyone has animal nature, Sometimes women will join the team that persecutes women, and accordingly, feminists desire to stop women's fratricide, so they put the slogan out, "Girls help girls." But from beginning to end, masculinists will not miss any opportunity to contempt, trample on women and spread this value. Whether before or after the slogan "Girls help girls" is issued, masculinists are united in spreading the story of girls hurt girls, regardless of whether the story is true or not, in order to prove the innate inferiority of women, fighting in the nest, and even mocking girls help girls in turn, providing legitimacy for hurting women. Similarly, rumors that show women's stupidity and moral issues have also been favored by masculinity. This is probably what Liu Cixin said about the fundamental difference between men and women in their way of thinking. As long as they are absolutely obedient to animal nature, every man will become a masculinist. He does not have to worry about finding the peak of truth. He just needs to shake his fists and scare people who are weaker than him, so that they have to flatter him, and then he can turn his favorite rules into the peak of truth, and establish his country of truth here. There are humiliation and satire of women everywhere, thus forming a systematic exclusion and suppression of them in real resource allocation. It constitutes a politeness to men, and the masculinists thus feel the pride of being born as men, and at least in front of women, he regards himself as the supreme power. Therefore, no shortage of people chasing a woman who has a high salary position or has learned important new skills, shouting women are not suitable for this. Negative rumors about female driver, female judge, and female leader are spread as quickly as the wind by patriarchal group, as if the women's crime always deserves more than death. In social public opinion such as film and television series adapted from news reports and real events, the distorted facts of not mentioning women for good things, not mentioning men for bad things are common. News reports hide the subject of male perpetrators and use a style of writing in which sublime words with deep meaning generally while praising men and criticizing women, which is really common. There's no need to say how many years have passed since Diao Aiqing died of dismemberment case in Nanjing College of Adult Education, but the murderer has not been arrested. A scriptwriter added a scene of killed for having emotional disputes with the murderer in the adapted television series with no respect for the deceased and her family at all, just as light as people's habit of convicting the woman of betraying a man when she is beaten by him. There is no need to talk about the classic routine of hesitation in protecting pregnant women or fetuses during difficult childbirth scene, and finally people ever discard her as a container when she is still alive in Chinese TV series. What is most annoying is the Matilda effect, which refers to the fact that women's achievements and merits are belittled, ignored, and even directly attributed to men's behavior. During the epidemic, there were obviously a large number of female medical staff who helped Hubei, but the TV series The Most Beautiful Retrovert, adapted from this real incident, shows the image of female medical staffs who retreated under the pretext of taking care of the family. An ex-scion, a male police officer who redeems everyone in The Knockout, whose most well-known prototype is Officer Ren Changxia, who is known as the goddess of the police. Lao Fan, the protagonist of The Last Lesson. His prototype is the rural female teacher Fang Pinger, and many plots in the movie are her real experiences. But the main creator has changed the man to a woman. The prototype of the story bottom line is about a mom named Zhang Cholian who upholded justice for her daughter who had been killed. But the main creator adapted the prototype from the mother to the girl's boyfriend. Not only do they distort history in the deeds of Chinese women, but they also do not spare foreign women. The female nurse Nightingale was sexually converted into a male medical staff of the same name and made a personal deeds film, Mr. Nandingale. Linnie Whiteland saved tens of thousands of refugees from being massacred at the Jinling Women's Arts and Sciences College, but she was beaten by the Japanese army and slandered by the Wang puppet government. After witnessing all kinds of atrocities, she suffered from depression and committed suicide in 1941. Her tombstone was engraved with Jinling Eternal Life. However, in the movie The Flowers of War, based on this history, the image of this female international friend was actually changed to a priest. In history, ancient historians had the tradition of recording celestial phenomena. When the country and the people were at peace and prosperity, if auspicious celestial phenomena occur, the historians would record it as a good omen for the response of heaven and people. They would praise the wiseness of the ruler. However, during the time of women's power, the historian will deliberately miss records of good celestial phenomena or attribute the credit to their husband. Now, female professor Xiao Ruiping developed new dysmenorrhea drugs to treat menstrual abdominal pain for her daughter. As soon as the news came out, not to mention that some media deliberately blurred her gender, and there were some people also lectured netizen who clarified the professor's gender. Even if the professor is a woman, she is loving her children with a male mind. There are countless similar historical events, and countless insults with blood and tears. Once women in masculinistal society show their talents, it never lacks people to rush forward, nailing her to the pillar of shame of ranking below men. Historians and literati steal her achievements and whisper to her and her sisters who were her descendants. This is not something you should meddle in, nor is it where you should come. You should be obedient in assisting men, having children, and taking care of them and your husband. This is your right way. Therefore, language is just a tool for masculinists to create and maintain the values of male interests first, and male is born leading and surpassing female, and is used to cover up the historical fact that the masculinistal group systematically excludes women. The fact is the least important thing to masculinists. Therefore, masculinity completely violates the Marxist-Leninist pursuit of truth. To this day, we are still experiencing this point over and over again. The warrior charging for love is a tragic and cool joke about a man came to have a bone to pick with his girlfriend after he knew she was a philanderer. Even if it was proved to be a rumor, most people were still fooled, and even now many people believe it. The chat records of a female preschool teacher who was disguised by a man poisoning boys because of her animosity to men. The Chinese men are really greasy posting of a post by a man who disguised a woman, and two men disguised themselves as a female overseas student and relative family and daughter-in-law of a corrupt official to post flaunting their wealth, which are both regarded as women's and feminist crimes to be widely spread by masculinists. In the case of Dang Jijun stabbing the female judge Wang Jejia to death, even though the official has issued a notice to clarify that Dang Jijun lied to report losses and failed to commit insurance fraud, so he deliberately killed a person, there are still some people still applauded the murderer. A man in Zhuhai was dissatisfied with the judgment on divorcing property division of divorce, so he drove indiscriminately and collided with pedestrians to retaliate against the judge. The public opinion tendency among the masculinistal group is similar. Regardless of whether information about the woman is clear or not, people also give priority to blaming the wife who divides the man's property. Not to mention the remarks of some people about the Tangshan beating case and the Hangzhou wife murder case. Let's look at the man who killed the male judge who sentenced him to domestic violence. A bunch of people spread rumors that the judge made unfair judgments and shouted, "Good job." The blogger who refutes rumors like these is denigrated as pretending fairness in stopping a fight, but actually help women, and some people even pretend him to pick to fight with others in the comment section of some videos of gender conflicts. So never try to argue with masculinistalists, don't try to use words to impress them, but learn to tit for tat from them. First of all, we must understand the thinking patterns of masculinistalists. It's easy to understand it from the perspective of child psychology. Children who have not received social training healthily, and equally only learn to respond to external stimuli with animalistic instincts, and pursue the rules of maximizing their own interests. They will successively abstract the others independent of themselves into such a simple division: those who follow me, those who go against me, and those who make rules. Those who follow me are friendly people who can communicate peacefully. The image of those who go against me basically comes from other children who compete with me for candies and toys. The image of those who make rules probably comes from the guardian or the kindergarten teacher. Phallocrat can use this set of thinking to adulthood by violence. He regards women as deteriorated versions of men, so the orderer should allocate more and better resources to him. If the order does not do this, he will believe that orderers are biased. In order to maximize his interests of being a man, he must maximize the number of those who follow him and minimize the number of those who go against him. To achieve this goal, he must always game with the orderer to urge it make rules that consider his benefits first, like making the order be lenient towards those who follow him, and severely punish those who go against him. Of course, the order does not have to be specific individuals. It can be social sentiment and public opinions influenced by morality and law in specific historical periods. The goal of the game is to make the cost of making the orderer accept the child's proposal less than the cost of rejecting the child's proposal. The simplest thing is to win more support than the opposition to enhance his own power. For example, the incidence of women falsely accusing men of secretly filming sexual harassment that masculinists relish, even if their cause is endless incidents of voyeuristic recording women to sell the videos to men, and some contradictions are obviously misunderstandings from women. The masculinists still insist on using the words fraudulently and false accusation of more serious words to label the woman as an unforgivable sinner, and unite to push the relevant popularity far higher than the incidence of voyeuristic recording women that occur every day. The most essential mean is establishing collective conditioned reflexes. They will use some words as conditioned stimulus, such as the common sayings mentioned before, like, a woman's virtus increases with her ignorance. The most poisonous things are women's hearts. Women always misplace their misery, and femme fatale. From the details, many derogatory characters with radicals linked to feminization can also be counted. Certain words and phrases serve a dual function as coded signals. Others may not understand what they mean, but people in the circle are very clear about their obvious aggression in calligraphic colors, which is a bit like primary school boys use nicknames to bully classmates. As soon as the nickname sounded, a large number of students began to make fun of the bullied. The more angry and helpless the owner of the nickname, the more enjoyable the bullies are. Although this is just a small prank between children in the eyes of adults, and attributes it to the child as ignorant and just play for fun, this amateur cognition conceals bullying behavior and makes the bullies more and more unscrupulous and even proud of their ability to manipulate people. When it comes to masculism, words with similar properties such as March 8th, CMG, Jiandachitsu egg, and various phrases that imply a woman is a sex worker through similar shapes or pronunciations. If the above phrases are only coded and humiliating, then the phrases and sentences introduced next are more appealing. First of all, the feminist movement occurred in some countries, but it was soon retaliated by masculinists, counterattacked by masculinists, especially in Japan, whose culture originated from China. According to masculinists, Japanese men beat women because they were falsely accused and molested by women on the subway. Later, they found that the effect was surprisingly good, so this behavior was widely imitated by everyone and even perverts. Masculinists in China are looking forward to this situation in China. They compare it to the leading version or leading server of long-term operation games, and unite to spam the screen under the relevant events with version updates. Enter the advanced server. Accelerate. The industry with deep roots does not lack relevant stakeholders, and the scale of similar groups of speeches is astonishing, which of course strengthens the courage of imitators. Just like when someone questioned the authority of the order, the same person would quickly surround him and indirectly encourage him to challenge the authority and shake the arrogance of the existing order. In the comments section of the high school student secretly photographed a woman and then he was caught. Some people threatened others to pardon the student who photographed the woman voyeuristically with the possibility of giving up on himself by force. The cases of taking voyeuristic photos, spreading rumors about female victims are rising exponentially. These powerful masculinistal groups are growing into a force that cannot be underestimated to stir up public opinion, and their populations are showing a trend of becoming younger. Of course, among these slogans, the most successful one is the homophone, changing right to boxing in Chinese, replacing feminism with woman boxing, and pile up a large number of negative news about the female group in the place where the word or word appears, including rumors, especially the stupid actions of women while fighting for their own rights and interests, training the public to connect the two, and even playing memes when women express their own expectation normally and narrate the relevant history, mocking the victims and the narrators to woman boxing, and destroy the atmosphere. This statement is both humiliating and appealing. First of all, to laymen, this word is completely unfamiliar and sounds like a boxing game. And like the malicious nickname mentioned above, it perfectly achieved the task of humiliating the bullies, relieving seriousness and helping the bullies get rid of their responsibilities. The perpetrator trained the bystanders to laugh to drown the grievance and anger of the bullies, and then shrugged his shoulders and spread his hands to pretend to be innocent. Didn't you hear the laughter? I said we are just playing. Its code nature is even more dangerous. The saying boxing is full of potential hints of physical violence, and inadvertently pulling the person's subconscious into the context of the Colosseum. You woman said this to me is equivalent to physical violence attacking me. In the future, the man will have sufficient reasons to attack back physically violently, and subtly completed the call to provoke the masculinistal group to attack women. In addition to the above, the slogans that use phrases to summarize the incidents of harming men benefiting women are also very popular, such as the case of a woman jumping off a car because the driver frequently changed lanes, resulting in the Hualala driver being sentenced, commonly known as the Hualala case. The case of a woman instigating her daughter to frame the cake shop owner's sexual assault, commonly known as the cake shop owner's case. The case of Xiao Huijun falsely accusing the boss of sexual harassment, referred to as the Xiao Huijun case. Zhai Xinxin blackmailing his boyfriend's huge compensation to cause his death, referred to as the Zhai Xinxin case. And there is also a woman suspected the man was secretly photographing because his flashing shoe upper, and called the police to check and did not find the secretly photographed. The man named Zhuai Feng Xiaoya claimed thousands of yuan in compensation from the women and asked the subway to publicly apologize, commonly known as Zhuai Feng Xiaoya case. By the same token, there are a normal Tan Love, Shangxi rape case after engagement, etc. Open the platform with most male users and you will find that there are always a large group of people repeating these crimes of women in a rosary style, as if this is a solemn and painful anniversary of Def Eaton, so that the masculinistal group urgently needs a victory to avenge the previous shame. The impression this tactic brings to people is similar to a large group of people who recite a series of repeated spells, singing war songs to women, including feminist groups. It doesn't matter the things they recite have authenticity or not. They always believe in another set of rhetoric that is different from the official ones. This makes their appeal always look like a beast bound by the existing order. As long as the chain is still tied to this beast, no matter how you comfort it, it still have blood-red eyes and prepare to break the chains at any time. Many people want to ignore this elephant in this room, but the beast's teeth grinding sounds like thunder, spewing out of the foul smell, and they would rush out of the darkness to eat a few people at any time, as if it was part of the darkness, making the chains fastened to its bobby look even more and more fragile. To put it bluntly, it means letting the public see the universal existence and extreme dangers of masculinistalists, the uncertainty of the object of their harm and the significance of the damage they may cause, out of fear of recognition and surrender to masculinity, and then join the masculinistal group to suppress women's rights. Therefore, masculinist thoughts, androcentric worldview, latriarchal ideology pay great attention to its own authoritarianism. They either likes to quote famous quotes or even dismantle and replace some words to pretend to be powerful, or pretend to advocates how patriotic and socialism are, and declare that all those who oppose themselves are capitalism and overseas forces. If the above statement is too complicated to understand, we can introduce the thinking system of the 5 elements to sort it out. Imagine a hard and dense material that can be made into a sharp blade, which can cut whatever is cut, and can be used to divide the world into 2. One is the self, the other is the other. One is beneficial to me, the other is against me. When faced with descriptions of gender contradictions, all masculinists are filters of praise and criticism based on their own short-term interests, and their understanding of the word materialization is the core manifestation of this. When a man steal, rob and cheat others to get women as sexual objects, some people will say that he is materializing women. When hearing this, the general thought may be, what did I do to be said to be materialized? What kind of behavior is materialized? How to prevent the occurrence of materialization? And come to understand the relevant causal relationship. But masculinists don't need to do this. They can extend their animal instincts from childhood. So their reaction is like a primary school student who hears criticism. He only understands that materialization does not seem to be a good word, so they kick up a fuss by nature. They capriciously change the word materialization into a bomb that which will trigger a large-scale criticizes from others after thrown on someone's head. They contribute to large-scale use of it, like women who ask for rights and money are materializing themselves. Only women who work more and require less deserve real feminist right. However, the internal logic of this statement is still to suppress women's rights and interests, and even package the labor value of female proletariat, and ask capitalists together to bargain on women's value as if it is the cabbage in supermarkets, and even turn the blame on women. It is because women are greedy, lying on the credit book of the previous generation of women and shamelessly demanding, which leads to this tragedy. After that, he did not forget to separate women with an invisible blade. It is only pitiful for countless hard-working and brave innocent women. It can be seen that the key words and means to maintain masculinistal group are division and cutting. Just like a person holding a knife, the male were born by cutting off the functions of their gestation and dividing out the gender. They only divide enemies and their companions, divide praise and criticism according to their own short-term interests. Rely on the standards of whether you obey or not, how much value can you bring to them to divide the female group, the ruled. Sharp knives made of dense matter are surrounded one by one, forming a sharp cage with inner walls, making it difficult for the besieged to touch and escape. Just like what the three-body men did to the Earthlings, they monitored them with Zaphan, blockade their technology, trapped their mind, and later drove everyone to Australia to siege humans in time and space, and prevented them from transcending. Just as patriarchal group never forget to keep monitoring and suppressing groups that fight for women's right. Lu Xun summarized this vividly. All countries and all religions have many strange rules. They regard women as an unlucky animal, threaten her to make her obey like slaves. This basically invincible dense matter corresponds to the energy form metaphorized by rigidness, Jin, among the 5 forms. Solid, abiding, can be made into sharp blades, pokes, cuts, bringing pain to the opposite side and weakening its power. It can also be made into shields that suppress, resist any force, and shield screens and walls that isolate something. Corresponding to what the masculinistalists did above, we can understand why Zhuang Yan became a science fiction goddess, because Jin Shang Shui, the forced oppression, only allows the passage of the compulsive thing that does not disobey it to go through. Zhuang Yan is weak and obedient, without any offensiveness, and has no ability to protect herself in front of Luo Ji, a man who longs for her. Therefore, many men like such women. The past education also encouraged girls to become such women. The wife follows the husband with downcast eyes, meek and obedient. But women, as creatures, certainly have their own instincts and will not be unconditional obedient. So the masculinist smashed her backbone of resistance, tied her hands and feet, cut off the neck of the transgressor, blocked their route of escape, trapped their mind, and shut out the potential resistor's voice. Logical thinking, route of information transmission, escape, and even route of technological evolution, biological evolution, these linear extension concepts are the energy forms metaphorized by stem mu in the 5 elements. The energy forms of rigidness, Jin, can form a certain restraint on them. The Matilda effect mentioned above can be extended to editing and shielding in the information dissemination methods used by masculinistal society to build collective subconsciousness. The most important thing is not what you see, but what you don't see or what you subconsciously ignore. Taking the public opinion on the gender conflict between the 2 sides before and after the keynote of the Datong rape case after engagement as an example, the judgment of the incident has brought a significant impact in the huge masculinistal group, but the material foundation of masculinistalism is particularly solid after all. This group of people can still satirize everywhere to go against the official notice, asserting that this is a false accusation case and regard it as the key evidence to prove that the government's favoritism to women, and are crying around, which has made people surprised at masculinistalists' high attainments in communication science. They are best at using phrases to establish conditioned reflexes to domesticate the masses and guide their emotions. Phrases can be edited or distorted. Observing the gender contradiction public opinion field in recent years, a core phrase that the masculinistal group loves the most is false accusation. If you hear this word and think that it is fixedly associated with a woman falsely accusing a man of sexual harassment and assault, which means that the masculinistalists have successfully tamed you. According to China's gender contradiction public opinion field, let's simplify the methods and steps of domestication into 3 stages. Step 1. Focus on promoting conclusive real events, such as Xiao Huijun falsely accusing the boss of sexual harassment. Zhu Jun was falsely accused of sexual harassment. A woman instigated her daughter to falsely accuse the owner of a cake shop, and the masculinistal group would use keywords such as Xiao Huijun, Zhu Jun, and cake shop owner to promote and make a large-scale publicity and hype, which would make the popularity higher than the incident of sexual harassment from a man to the women, just like a group of burly men yelling every day, "John owes me money." Then there is the second step, mixing false information into a large amount of real information. One is to spread rumors of false accusations from others, and expand the scale of false accusations in publicity. The masculinistal group began to suspect or directly accuse the woman of false accusation, and plead for the man who molested a woman. Of course, most of them were half-joking but malicious speculation. For example, the case was described as the man was just joking, but the woman made him look bad. The man didn't give the woman enough money, etc. Which can be compared to the unilateral saying of the burly men, "Not only John owed me money, but Jack, who lives in the same community with him, also owed me money," but the authenticity of this statement is unknown. The second is to expand the definition of false accusation, such as someone suspecting a man secretly photographed, even if nobody reported the case, it was only suspicion and someone asked the management to check and prove it. It would be defined as false accusation by the masculinistal group, which is typical of Zhui Feng Xiaoya case. It's like that burly men shouted, "David, who is in the same community as John and Jack, has not paid back the money." David did borrow money, but it was not overdue. After being said like this, his reputation became bad. The success of this method is due to the Zhang Wei spread rumors of secretly filming of migrant workers on the subway. It provides a key help for masculinistal power in the public opinion warfare. It can be said that without this incident, the masculinistal power can't achieve today's success. In gender contradiction in China, Zhang Wei is a very perfect perpetrator. First of all, she was no possibility to be secretly photographed to post on pornographic websites with trousers on. Secondly, she checked the man's mobile phone. Without catching the key evidence, she still asserted that he photographed voyeuristically and spread rumors about him in the network. As a migrant worker, the man is doing hard work with a low income. He takes photos more out of curiosity about new things like subway, which reminds people of their parents who have worked hard to raise them but cannot keep up with the times. It accurately hits the soft part of most people's hearts and make them feel helpless and sour sadness. In the eyes of such a friendly, simple, hardworking and clumsy migrant worker, Zhang Wei is undoubtedly a towering intellectual figure. Just when he was squatting at the bottom of the high-end transportation vehicle in a big city, this colossal intellectual figure gave him a blow, searched his mobile phones, and accused him of secretly taking pictures without finding key evidence, which seemed to constitute a landscape where postmodern people deny pre-modern survivors, showing the unreasonable conviction and expulsion of the builders by the enjoyers of urban infrastructure. So the criticism of Zhang Wei came one after another, and the popularity of the whole thing was pushed up. Mothers began to remind their son not to point the camera at others on public transportation. The masculinistal group are indispensable naturally in an indignant crowd. They will not miss any opportunity to fire at the female group. As a woman, Zhang Wei's attitude towards a man as a domineering superior undoubtedly tramples on the most important male dignity of the masculinist. The targets she accused were the workers' and peasants' brothers representing the soul of the republic, so the incident also happened to mobilize the bureaucracy-induced PTSD in the Chinese people's heart, so that masculinists can very successfully combine female rights closely and firmly with labels such as petty bourgeoisie, bureaucrats, unequal beneficiaries in a society with unequal wealth distribution, snob, gold digger, and betrayers of the workers' and peasants' alliance, and spend a lot of effort to condition the masses until the narrative replacement was completed. Of course, in this process, the main role is men's overwhelming violence compared to women, the exclusion, even ostracization of women in the distribution of power and resources, and the control of means of production and production technology completed with aforementioned two. At around this time, slogans such as "learning from Japanese and Korean men," "samurai duel," and "version update," which imply that men suspected of photographing voyeuristically or sexual harassment should counterattack with violence, began to explode and become popular. At the same time, because Zhang Wei is from Sichuan University, some companies announced that they would not recruit graduates from Sichuan University, which has received widespread support from some netizens. Therefore, the conditioned reflex domestication from masculinistalism was successful, and the sign of success was the popularity of the Zhui Feng Xiaoya incident. A man nicknamed Zhui Feng Xiaoya was suspected of voyeuristically photographing with a miniature pinhole spy camera by two women on the subway because they found that the man's shoes were flashing, so they asked the man to prove his innocence by taking off shoes. The man was deeply angry about the incident and believed that he had been slandered for no reason. So he wrote an article to accuse the two women of false accusations and cried about his being accused mistakenly. The relevant text was spread everywhere by the masculinistal group, and emphasized the embarrassment and helplessness of the man taking off his shoes and stepping on the cold floor in full view of the public, which causing his social death. The man also sued the two women and the subway company, demanding that the women pay thousands of yuan in compensation and the subway company play the woman's apology statement in a loop, which was rejected by the court, defining the matter as the man maliciously expanded the influence. The trial result made the male supremacists very dissatisfied, and the official announcement was different from the man's description, such as the man took off his shoes in the police office, it was the last subway that day, and there were no other passengers in the carriage, etc. The incident became evidence that the government and judicial institutions favor women, according to male supremacists. Male supremacists achieved an important victory from then, and large-scale distrust of the judicial institutions began to arise. Therefore, the dissatisfaction caused by subsequent verdicts of the Fat Cat's suicide, Wang Jiejia's murder and Datong rape case in public opinion, is nothing more than a proof of the rise of male chauvinism and its narrative success. As a result, slogans such as Leaning Tower and female-based society were widely circulated, and rumors that showed the stupidity and low quality of female individuals were abnormally pushed up. It is allowing women to eat at the table that caused the chaos. We shouldn't have let women be independent at the beginning. What Confucius said is right. The slogans about regret over reform and women's liberation, and the inspiration of feudal order like these became popular. The masculinists began to promote de-responsibility, be invincible people, advocated learning from the extremist in Zhuhai, retaliated against the judge through indiscriminate attacks to create social panic, and forcing the public to put pressure on women. Related expressions were flooded everywhere. This is the third stage, which is about the same as a bunch of burly men pounding the glass while shouting, people in the community with John, Jack, David often owe money and don't pay it back. Don't make friends with them in the future. Thus force more and more people to join them and exclude the residents of that community. Because the previous article mentioned the existence of the fractal from gender to the hierarchical structure of human society, this process of conditioned reflex domesticating the masses is very capable, and can even be used as a classic formula for communication. So what does this have to do with the rigidness gene in the 5 elements? First of all, the blade made of it has a powerful slicing ability, which is manifested in behavior as a segmentation of a group. One group of people attacks another group of people with a certain identity, and builds a sense of bonding. Next is the mechanism of conditioned reflex. People will build reaction loops with repetitive and easy-to-memorize fragmentary information to cut off logical thinking. Just like under the overwhelming propaganda of masculinistalists, when you see the word false accusation, you will automatically think that a man is convicted by a woman for no reason, your body will automatically react and create relevant situations. Male supremacists will also summarize the success of defeating female narratives with the classic story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, but this is precisely a mirror that reflects their values. To summarize the story of the boy who cried wolf, a boy understood that when he shouts wolf, the adults will put aside the work on hand and run to drive the wolf away. Therefore, he repeatedly cried wolf, with no wolf around to deceive the adults to come and have fun. Over time, the child gradually became disgusted by the villagers. Finally, he encountered a real wolf, but because of the repeated deceptions, the signal for help was ignored, and he was eventually eaten by the wolf. This story is intended to warn readers not to exploit people's trust, especially when their own safety needs protection. But according to some or even many people, the ending of this story has become an advocacy, advocating that when people see such a person in a certain group, they should isolate the entire group where the person is, and even encourage everyone to harm the people in this group, and they would not say villagers who report there was a wolf anymore, which has constituted a distortion of values. First of all, to the entire village, wolves are hostile forces that endanger the personal safety and production and life of villagers. Judging from the fact that the boy reported that there were wolves, then the villagers would immediately interrupt their work and come. The wolves wandered around the village frequently, so warning and even elimination of wolves must be the first priority. The boy in the story lied to report the wolf for fun should be punished. But women who suspect that some people photograph them voyeuristically are basically not for fun, but are really worried that their privacy and others will be violated, and the photos may even be used to spread rumors. But the wolf disaster cannot be ignored. If turning a blind eye to the wolf disaster becomes a common choice for everyone, It only means that a considerable number of villagers have not regarded killing wolves as their top priority from the heart, but instead covets the power of wolves, hoping to become a complicitor of wolves to oppress other villagers and science them into submission, and exacerbate the rift within the village community. After that, by amplifying a handful of false reports, paltry against the backdrop of wolf attacks, they instilled more fear of human error than of the wolves themselves to shirk their and the wolves' responsibility. In reality, cases of men secretly filming, harassing, or sexually assaulting women, while female victims fear gossip and dare not speak out, occur everywhere. The perpetrators often act with impunity, and the related industries are deeply entrenched. The long-standing oppression of women in a patriarchal society is the root cause of the women's heightened reactions. It is why many initially side with the women. The problem originates from the masculinistal system, yet it is twisted into special treatment for women to smear the female community. It is lamentable how consistently effective the masculinistal tactics of distorting the truth are. If we truly want to solve the problem at its root, public opinion should guide people to combat the industries of voyeuristically filming and human trafficking. Why let public opinion focus on attacking women and silencing potential victims? The only possible outcome, apart from emboldening these shadowy industries, is unimaginable. Japan and South Korea have already succeeded in this regard. Why, as a socialist country, does China have a significant portion of its population learning from these capitalist countries, even one of them with a history of fascist militarism that invaded China? When we piece together the fragmented information cut apart by patriarchal society and examine the term special treatment, according to male supremacists, it becomes clear. They never care about cause and effect or logic. They revel in the pleasure of being a man to dominate women with their strength, enjoying the thrill of causing trouble and shifting all consequences onto women, while using force to intimidate dissenters. In the eyes of male supremacists, the world should be a continuation of such pleasure. It is why they despise feminism, labeling feminists as sinners who obstruct human continuation, and anti-humanists. The birth of life and the emergence of males originate from the concept of division in the five elements rigidness gene. As if an invisible blade splits the world into internal and external, one part of the universe contracts into the internal environment of life, governed by rules distinct from the external. Yet, it is not entirely isolated. It still relies on external materials and energy for metabolism to maintain internal stability. Thus, living beings develop a binary reflexive perception of external stimuli, what benefits them and what harms them, evolving into two opposing emotional tones, praise and condemnation, as if split by a blade. The emergence of males is another cut into the internal world, and perhaps not the last. The conflict between genes' infinite self-replication and limited resources leads to clustering and exclusionary behaviors. Each cut, each boundary, turns hostility toward outsiders into a means for insiders to maintain the boundary's existence. This may also be the root of male supremacist self-esteem derived from despising women. Humans' omnivorous habits in which the large size they achieve through as a result equip them to efficiently prey on smaller animals, ensuring relatively abundant energy in their ecological niche. This enables males to develop sizes and lifespans comparable to females. Building on this, males, by offloading the cost of reproduction onto females, gain even greater size. Thus, their animalistic tendencies grow unchecked, turning them into male supremacists. Male supremacists are like unruly children, extending their demands on mothers to all women, forcibly demanding from them selflessness, tolerance, diligence, and endurance surpassing even their own mothers. Diligence and forbearance are indispensable too. To this end, they have stripped women of everything: education, rights to resources, and even the permission to speak and be heard. Defying men in matters of reproduction is the gravest taboo, as the entire patriarchal world is built upon this premise. Here we understand the true meaning of the metaphor: the fish that dried up the sea. Macroscopically, the abundant resources like sea gave birth to life forms that used these resources to perpetuate their genetic code. Among them emerged life forms that degenerated reproductive functions, leading to a proliferation of species intertwined into a complex, stable ecosystem. This, in turn, gave rise to humans, beings capable of complex logical thought and adept at exploiting natural laws. To other life forms strictly bound by environmental constraints, humans represent a dimensional shift, like moving from water to land. Among humans, there also exist life forms that degenerate reproductive functions, reproducing by injecting their genetic templates into non-degenerate forms. These forms, leveraging this mechanism, grow larger than their female counterparts, thus capable of taking measures like controlling resource distribution and enforcing mating to trap non-degenerate forms in the water, using them as genetic proliferation tools, like running a fish farm. Water is essential for reproduction and maintaining life. For men, the degenerates on land, accessing water is easy, and their larger size demands more of it. But for women, the non-degenerates, especially pregnant ones, they rely on the water left by the degenerates to survive and reproduce. Less water means fewer resources and space, forcing them into conflict like betta fish, clamoring to leave the water and join the men on land. This is the origin of gender conflict. Thus, in masculinity, restricting women's rights to dominate them becomes a key tenet. Male supremacists on land spare no effort to preach women's inherent flaws. Women are greedy, materialistic, and their awakening is selfish. Women fight among themselves and lack unity. They press the undegenerates ones even more fiercely back into the water, forcing them to contribute to the very system that oppresses them. Men increasingly outnumber women on average. Water, the resource, becomes scarcer. And water is not only used by humans, the entire ecosystem depends on it. The more humans take, the more other life forms starve. To feed the growing population, forests are cleared for farmland, and lakes are filled for land. But populations inevitably exceed regional carrying capacity, and the environment deteriorates, harming humans in turn. Analogously, at the micro level, human males, unburdened by reproduction, save energy to grow larger. Furthermore, competing with other males for scarce reproductive resources further drives their size evolution. Where does the energy for this growth come from? From the mother's body. Thus, the females, selectively filtered out by males through this predatory pattern of male exploitation, modify their genes during reproduction, reducing energy supply to embryos, thus losing the ability for autonomous reproduction. In other words, females who did not evolve this mechanism were consumed by male paternal imprinted genes, failing to give birth or even dying. Throughout human evolution, males' degenerated reproductive functions used this degeneration to grow and move onto land, then stifled females' autonomous reproduction, cutting off one path for human continuation. This imbalance leads to reckless proliferation, disrupting population and ecological balance, truly the fish that dried up the sea, as in the three-body problem. It is a testament to dialectical materialism. The more a thing develops, the stronger its self-negating force becomes. Yet even if you explain this scientifically, male supremacist group remain unmoved. The world exists because of men and for men is the cornerstone of their worldview. They distort all disciplines into religions upholding masculinity, branding anything contrary as heresy. Theoretically, the humanities fall first given their lower barrier to entry, but the biological sciences were attacked earlier, with biased interpretations like the female immune system intercepts sperm to select more vigorous genes. But this is a male-centric explanation, portraying the immune system as a sperm vetting machine. Objectively, the immune system is carrying out programmed operations of clearing foreign entities. For most of evolutionary history, survival was hard. Easy pregnancy, especially with a less competitive offspring, wasted effort, failed to pass on genes, risking the mother's death. Only the most vigorous sperm breached the barrier, having a chance to bond with the egg, passing on their genes, a more accurate description. Evolution has no subjective direction. It is code that happens to run, like the Scyphopteron sea slugs that mate by shooting darts or the low IQ kakapo who can't fly. They survive by chance, labeled fit by observers. Another anthropocentric question: why humans don't have estrus? The answer we often hear is, human females have evolved the ability to be in heat at any time in order to obtain food from strong males. Is flawed. Comparing humans to seasonal breeders reveals the truth. Fundamentally, estrus manifests as rapid influctuations in reproductive hormone levels within an organism during specific periods. This hormonal disrupts homeostatic balance, triggering physiological restlessness that compels mating behavior to alleviate distress. The causation becomes evident. cyclic variations in survival critical resources, food, water, thermal range, create disproportionate fitness advantages for offspring born during phenologically optimal windows. This seasonal selection pressure drives the evolutionary emergence of estrus-mediated reproductive synchronization. Let's take a closer look at the two conclusions which have been spread widely and still popular among people with obvious patriarchal tendencies. They all show a clear stance inclination. Women evolved for men, who shaped women's evolution by controlling resources, thus shaping human evolution. I saw the two conclusions respectively in a well-made documentary and in a hardcover book on humanities. What we witness here is the omnipresence of patriarchal cognitive frameworks, a hegemonic apparatus that has successfully co-opted the apparatuses of intellectual producing, from journalistic spheres to the academy, as if whispering to women, "You are as you are because of me. What will the cost be if you displease me?" What is deeply unsettling is the realization that humans, much like breeding animals, are selectively shaping their own kind. This undeniable fact suggests that the evolutionary trajectory of our species is bifurcating into two distinct paths, and this divergence has effectively solidified into a hierarchical framework, one that is now thoroughly entrenched within the very machinery of social operation, which contributing to approaching the evolutionary endgame when different social classes of humans exhibit distinctions like which bet we humans and dogs, in Liu Cixin's Raising Mankind. In retrospect, this media and literature come from the West. It seems that Asians should not blindly worship white Western civilization. It is precisely because the West entered industrial civilization earlier, thus dominate the world earlier, and was able to transfer the contradictions in development mentioned above to the outside. So a large number of feudal remnants were preserved, such as cannibalistic capitalism, banning abortion, women's lack of voting rights, child marriage, and so on. In other words, their prosperity was not earned by respecting women. Naturally, the predatory nature of patriarchy or masculism also expands significantly along with the increase in military power. They sought to experience and proclaim their dignity as men of a superior race by engaging in sexual relations with women from other naryons, including other races, spawning yellow fever and steak theory. Thus, the tragedies of Japanese and Korean women were inevitable. Japan and Korea, with their small territorial size, lack of strategic depth, were unable to engage in prolonged attribution warfare like China. Moreover, they faced overwhelming military disparity against the Western powers' advanced warships and artillery. To protect their own interests, the aristocratic classes quickly capitulated and sacrificed women from the lower and middle classes, forcing them into sexual slavery as comfort women to appease the enemy. The shame of this legacy lingers like a shadow over the men of Japan and South Korea, turned into male rage, branding their women as disgrace and justifying brutal suppression. The behavior of local men provoked extreme backlash from women, which the men seized as an opportunity to vilify women and justify even harsher oppression. To return to the point, why did China miss the first industrial revolution? Let us first examine why the West, or more precisely Europe, became the birthplace of the first industrial revolution. The birthplace of Western civilization, the mountainous Greek peninsula, with its fragmented arable land and obstructed early transportation, gave rise to scattered city-states that proved inhospitable to the emergence of a unified civilization. Naturally, Western civilization inherently lacked the centralized resource coordination capacity of a unified agrarian empire. This structural constraint precipitated maritime trade dependency, which over time crystallized into entrenched mercantile interest groups. Moreover, the constant conflicts between scattered city-states and neighboring regions created sustained pressures on these societies, compelling them to pursue drastic improvements in productive efficiency. This existential imperative ultimately catalyzed the necessity-driven innovation that sparked the first industry revolution. In other words, the very geostrategic conditions that enabled China's unification paradoxically eliminated the existential imperative for productivity breakthroughs that Western civilizations faced. Returning to the metaphor of fish draining the sea, the patriarchal concept of nation and family ultimately revolves around monopolizing ownership of women, the fish, and resource, the water. At its core, it's about controlling fertile water to breed more fish to produce male heirs, ensuring perpetual dominance over both. The logic mirrors operating a fish farm: maximize exploitation to sustain ownership. The family as the foundational unit of the nation functions as a fishbowl, with both constructs following the same patriarchal logic of containment and control. The elite households, controlling the lion's share of resources, create scarcity for the rest. With their vast, lake-like reserves, they coerce women into trading their autonomy for a mere fraction of these waters to secure survival and reproduction. This, in turn, starves other men of access to reproductive resources, imposing severe barriers to genetic continuity. Forced to labor under the elite's yoke for even a sliver of reproductive hope, these men are systematically weakened, while the powerful grow even stronger, monopolizing not just resources, but information itself. This is the foundational logic of how exploiting classes emerge and endure to prevent their breeding resources from slipping away. Men's first instinct is to reinforce the fishbowl. Gatekeeping, veils, headscarves, foot binding, chains, torture, bans on education, from the tangible to the intangible, from bodily mutilation to psychological shackles, no method is left untried. In the case of underdeveloped productivity in the early days, for example, before the first industrial revolution, productive labor is mainly dependent on manpower, equating development for people with producing more people. Resources are prioritized for men, valued as combatants and primary laborers, while women receive the remnants. For patriarchs, women's well-being is irrelevant. Only their reproductive utility and the potential to produce male heirs matter. This logic manifests in the grotesque mother or child dilemma during obstructed labor, where hesitation, or even tacit approval of live cesarean sections, persists. Although modern medical ethics legally mandates prioritizing the mother's life in life-threatening childbirth, the agonizing mother or child dilemma persists to this day, so much so that it remains a perennial trope in television dramas. This reflects a pervasive mindset that reduces women to machinery, their worth measured by output. Saving the mother risks a potential son, while her damaged body may refuse further pregnancies out of trauma. Worse yet, the mother, traumatized by the near-death experience of obstructed labor, may refuse pregnancies altogether, even at the cost of her own survival. Save the baby, but what if it's a girl? Moreover, the mother's death leaves the burden of childcare to the husband's family, complicates remarriage and stunt future reproduction. Crudely put, this mentality epitomizes patriarchal society, a grotesque mirror of the feudal dynamic where the ruler commands death, and the subject dare not disobey, now recast as men's dominion over women's bodies. When such narratives proliferate in popular media, they become tools for social conditioning. For female audiences, the message is clear. A good woman must surrender her life to a man, absorb all blame and sacrifice, and ultimately die for him even because of him, with his genuine tear framed as the ultimate reward. This self-conditioning pervades romance for women literature, epitomized by tropes like chasing the wife to the crematorium, a cannibalistic logic as absurd as making Jia Zichui fall in love with Duke Wen of Zhen, who burned him and his mother to force him compliance. For male audiences, it offers not only the emotional payoff of a woman entrusting her life to love, but also reinforces patriarchal self-identity through the implied power to control life via reproduction. Though patriarchal society thrives on contempt for women, this very logic of masculine exclusivity, the insistence that real men must demarcate themselves from the feminine, forms the bedrock of patriarchal identity. Their sense of superiority depends on the subjugation of women. In this sense, patriarchs and male supremacists are paradoxically dependent on women. This contradiction may stem from the biological imperative. Male genetic survival is, after all, materially determined by access to female bodies. It's precisely this deep-rooted objectification, commodification, and enslavement of women that normalizes the Matilda effect, explaining why media erasing women's contributions passes censorship so effortlessly. For patriarchs, women's happiness and careers matter far less than controlling their reproductive utility. To this end, they actively fabricate rumors and scandals, weaponizing social stigma to reinforce the shackles on women. This is precisely why the verdict in the Tanju Fat Cat case incident sparked such widespread outrage. It became a simulacrupture, even inversion, of the patriarchal male sovereign, female subject hierarchy. That's why so many people compare Fat Cat to Chu Yuan, leaving ritual food offerings by the river. Chu Yuan is a royal minister who drowned himself after his ruler deceived by corrupt countries. Many lamented that love no longer exists or wailed the Datong Engaman Trape case dated the sanctity of marriage. Yet these reactions reveal that so-called marriage and love are merely constructs, rules which exist to ensure that men hold the dominant position in terms of profits. The moment they can no longer maintain their position as absolute beneficiaries under these rules, they immediately tear up the system, overturn the table, and shed responsibility, loudly blaming feminism for dating beautiful traditions. Only then may people see the truth. All that sacred rhetoric and beautiful tradition are nothing but useless, hypocritical decorations. So in the past, theoretically, as long as living conditions weren't so dire that women's body couldn't endure them, males could control survival resources to turn females into breeding machines, where population production efficiency depended solely on how tolerable those living conditions were. But before the first industry revolution, the ceiling of productivity was fixed, leaving society's limited capacity to withstand sudden crises when natural disasters struck, whether droughts, floods, or locust plagues, and reached a certain severity, social order would collapse. People relied more on plundering to secure resources, with only the strongest individuals surviving, and this strife further intensified resource scarcity. Vast territories inevitably faced power struggles between central and local authorities, leading to the adoption of highly centralized systems that prioritized efficiency and suppressed dissent downward. Resentment accumulated, and aggression and brutality trickled down along the hierarchy of exploitation, from the powerful to the weak. This, perhaps, is why feudal family morals, such as the 3 Obediences and 4 Virtues, biographies of exemplary women, 3 Bonds and 5 Constants, and 24 filial exemplars, grew increasingly extreme, rigidifying hierarchies of gender, male superiority over female, and age, elders over the young. Moreover, the ancient marriage system inherently involved the exploitation of families with daughters by those with sons. Driven by notions like raising daughters yields low returns, daughters are money-losing burdens, and a married-off daughter is like spilled water, gone forever, families reduced investment in raising girls, resorting to abandonment or even infanticide. This further elevated female mortality rates. As reproducive grew scarcer, a large population of unmarried men, deprived of outlets for their aggression, became unretrained individuals, worsening public security and intensifying survival pressures. Whether for pioneering new lands or defending clan interests, more male labor was demanded, deepening the vicious cycle. The patriarchal society, in response, squeezed even more relentlessly from women's reproductive capacity. Husbands kept their wives pregnant in relentless succession, until a son was born. Mother-in-law joined in persecuting their daughters-in-law, venting the grievances they had endured as young brides. Beyond giving daughters names like Zhaodi, summon a young brother, or Ting, stop their mothers from giving birth to girls. Superstitious for male heirs, people even resorted to infanticide as a form of dark ritual, aiming to terrify the souls of girls and deter them from reborn into the family. Women engaged in a grim arms race to bear sons, spawning pseudoscientific remedies like eating sour foods during pregnancy ensures a boy. Villagers fueled this competition, further skewing resource distribution to favor boys while neglecting girls. Families with newborn sons were celebrated by fanfare, rewarded with farm produce or land, while those with daughters received nothing at all. It was common for families to bankrupt themselves bearing multiple daughters before getting their coveted son. Then they'd squeeze from these older sisters, slashing investment in their upbringing, forcing them to drop out and work young, marrying them off early, all while exploiting the resulting gender imbalance to damn exorbitant bride prices. The cruel irony. That very windfall would later be drained paying their son's own marriage dowry. At worst, they'd resort to wife leasing, renting out a wife's fertility to those families desperate for male heirs, a practice that today manifests in surrogacy. In short, the revolution of sex-based reproductive strategies in the human ecological niche inevitably led to a patriarchal history built on exploiting female fertility and labor. However, Western civilization, driven by pressures of insufficient local resources, pioneered the first industrial revolution, redirecting developmental pressures outward through external plunder. Yet Western societies never fully abandoned internal oppression, as seen in historical witch hunts and religious dogma like abortion bans. Of course, the simplistic East-West dichotomy is imprecise. More accurately, a civilization's geographic starting point determines its developmental trajectory. Initial abundance is both a blessing and a curse, especially for civilizations in relatively isolated regions, like plant roots trapped in a confined pot, coiling along the inner walls in endless loops, which mirrors the cyclical patterns of history, embodying the 5 elements dynamic of rigidness restraining stem. Jean Camus. Stem mu represents the developmental path of continuity, whereas rigidness Jean embodies not only the primal instincts of biological bestiality, but also the pride and unkindness of patriarchal conservatism, a rigid adherence to the status quo and an eagerness to imitate antiquity at every turn. The patriarchal system's relentless exploitation of female reproductive capacity has fostered a production model dependent on demographic dividends, whose backward nature is glaringly evident. Dense populations lead to relative scarcity of per capita resources in a given region, fueling intense competition. This drains the ruled class of energy, fragmenting their collective power and diverting attention from the ruling elite. By depressing labor costs and transmuting contradictions between rulers and the ruled into infighting among the oppressed, the system mirrors the exploitative tactics of Xiangyang's art of controlling the people, a strategy we previously dissected. Once conditions permitted, it is inevitable that a rigid system will confine a civilization in a cage. Precisely why the first industrial revolution didn't emerge on this land. There was simply no incentive to invent labor-replacing machinery when the combined cost of development and adoption far outweighed the price of human toil. This is the domino effect of suppressing women's rights. It inflicts suffering on the people, especially women, because such development prioritizes endless human production over human well-being. Yet ironically, this very system became a pillar of China's modern rise. On the one hand, the ratio of men to women is extremely high. The surplus of men funnel abundant cannon fodder into wars. On the other hand, as a standard answer for the geography exam, the excess population provides abundant supply of cheap labor and a huge market that capital needs most. But an excessively growing population will inevitably lead to a relative scarcity of jobs, while the persistent gender imbalance, male surplus, further accelerates social disorder. This is why simplistic East-West dichotomies are inaccurate. Just as the West never focuses solely on external exploitation while abandoning domestic repression, those regions clinging to archaic feudal brutality, often due to geographic isolation, are never content with merely oppressing local women. Beyond the textbook answer of preventing female resource outflow, they inevitably resort to illegal means to secure cheap sexual exploitation and offspring. As Lu Xun observed, to patriarchal minds, romance and marriage are merely more expensive ways to purchase sexual access. This reality is reflected in works like the film Blind Mountain, while real-world cases include the infamous The Chained Woman with 8 Children incident and the government-documented Sheltered Female Postgraduate case. Reports suggest significant efforts to suppress these exposures, revealing these victims as mere fragments of a far larger iceberg. You might be shocked at why some always shield such illegal confinement and rape, why villagers unite so fiercely to protect these vile interests, even whitewashing inhuman acts as providing shelter, then shamelessly claiming, "We use neutral language in the official statement due to unclear details." But the truth is simple: tribal solidarity. Villagers, bound by the relational web of their insular society, instinctively side with their own rather than justice. It's the same logic by which patriarchal oppression, despite its blood-stained history, gets defended reflexively. The moment slogans like "feminism is anti-China" or "feminism is a petty bourgeois game" are shouted, they weaponize distortion and stigma, silencing dissent with precision. Suffering women are recast as the cost of rebellion, their pain glorified as inevitable. The old playbook repeats: erase every chance for women to defy men. From the perspective of patriarchal suppression of women's rights, fueling social instability and a vicious cycle of developmental stagnation, it resembles a malignant tumor in relentless expansion. Perhaps to mitigate these contradictions, the central government introduced the one-child policy, while feminist discourse was cautiously imported, and policies favoring women in impoverished regions were implemented. Yet, how deeply entrenched are the closed power structures in remote, isolated areas? Scandals like the misallocation of the Chunlei Project's funds, or the Bay's student aid program's descent into sexual exploitation by local power holders have repeatedly shattered any illusion that patriarchal inhumanity can be reformed. This is precisely why initiatives like Zhang Guimei's Huaping Women's High School adopt a near-direct intervention approach. If the oppressive order is unshakable from the top down, then the only leverage is at its weakest link: the most oppressed, the most discontented. Hence, the state-sanctioned promotion of Zhang Guimei's work, a calculated crack in the monolith. Yet this approach is in itself an act of helpless compromise. Failing to shine the spotlight on patriarchy itself is like editing out the root cause of the problem, playing right into the hands of patriarchal apologists and leaving ample room for their anti-feminist propaganda. Take, for instance, the workers in When the Mountain Flowers Bloom who grumble about the school's construction. Look at us, a bunch of grown men, bossed around day in and day out by a woman. Beijing's about to host the Olympics and here she is splitting schools by gender. An old maid like her, no kids, no proper duties. What's the point of a girls' high school? Patriarchal logic thrives on selective amnesia. When society favors sons over daughters, when educational resources are disproportionately allocated to men, they stay silent, reaping the benefits without a word. But the moment corrective measures are introduced, the moment resources are directly allocated to some excellent women, they suddenly cry discrimination, claiming that women-only schools are unfair, that gender conflict is a war started by women. They perform historical acrobatics, severing ties with past patriarchal systems while repackaging male privilege as male burden. Gender bias in resource allocation is twisted into gender bias in responsibility allocation, a sleight of hand that erases history. Even as they casually discard the privileges they once enjoyed, they posture as aggrieved victims, wailing about imagined persecution. What they refuse to acknowledge is that it is patriarchy itself, by confining women to the so-called proper duties of child-rearing and domestic servitude, by forcing them into dependence on marriage for mere survival, that has trapped society in this cycle of stagnant development. This system, which relies on human labor as disposable fuel, stifles industrial advancement and leaves countless people, including these very men, scraping by on meager wages. If you were to confront such patriarchal apologists with these truths, they would likely accuse you of elitist arrogance. This is part of their divide and conquer playbook, one that severs not just cause and effect logic, but also splinters society along fabricated battle lines. Their most potent tactic is weaponizing inequality. This is the approach that best aligns with universal values and resonates most deeply with people. For example, male chauvinists exploit conditioned reflexes to reframe gender conflict as a clash between privileged bourgeois women and the working class, especially impoverished men at the bottom of society. In their narrative, they also employ causal relationships to a certain extent. The narrative includes claims such as, using public taxes to fund all girls' high schools supports a single specific group, while depriving local men of educational resources, etc. When existing divisions aren't sharp enough to effectively ignite conflict, they manufacture confrontation outright through violent disruptions of social order, then erasing their own role as instigators in the narrative. This tactic, combined with the aforementioned exclusive bond mentality, unequal distribution of hardships/benefits, and partial use of causal relationships, is fully utilized in patriarchal propaganda and has entrenched the following perceptions in the public consciousness. Urban petty bourgeois women, indoctrinated by foreign influences, have adopted feminism. They exploit the suffering of rural underclass women for personal gain, prompting widespread emulation including by these very rural women while oppressing working class and lower middle class men. This provokes violent backlash from men long aggrieved by feminism, ultimately fueling a patriarchal resurgence and the rise of traditionalist revivalism. The patriarchal group manipulates the narrative by removing themselves as the root cause of the chain of events, distorting the patriarchal group's use of violence to suppress feminist movements and make an example of women into the righteous return of patriarchal tradition as ancestral wisdom. To dismantle this deceptive framing, one only needs to recognize that using Japan and South Korea as cautionary tales to intimidate Chinese women is no different from using the brutality of the Tangshan assault case or the Hangzhou wife murder case to terrorize women into submission. Then why do so many remain stubbornly blind to this? This touches on the most crucial word in the three-body problem, deterrence, and why the unequal distribution of suffering and pleasure has become the opposite of universal value. Why does public sympathy flow to the weak when they voice their grievances? As mentioned earlier, all humans harbor a beastly nature and selfish genes. There's an underlying resentment toward others' prosperity. If a vulnerable person in a group voices suffering, a stronger individual may exploit them to strengthen their own genetic advantage, whether by consuming them, literally or metaphorically, to sustain themselves or by coercing them into labor to reduce their own survival burden. If the weak happens to be a woman, A dominant male might seize her for reproduction. Thus, biological individuals face two choices. 1. Strike first, claim the weak for genetic gain, which can be exploitation or reproduction, or eliminate them to reduce resource competition. 2. Empower the weak, ally with them to jointly deter and resist potential oppressors. When survival pressure is high, the first option prevails. When conditions are stable, the second gains traction. This is the true reason behind the patriarchal claim that society pities women as the weaker sex and grants them privileges. By emphasizing men's contributions and their alleged suffering at women's hands, patriarchal rhetoric strategically positions women as the stronger group in public discourse. The implied message is, we men have sacrificed so much for society, yet these women, now empowered, dare to harm us. Who's to say they won't turn on you next? Or more insidiously, women's ruthless competitiveness and greed are why men can't find jobs, can't get married, and are denied sexual access. If women have driven us to despair, what stops desperate, unmarried men from becoming public threats? At its core, this is about the flow of primal instincts. Humanity doesn't respond to logic. It only grows hypersensitive when self-interest is threatened. What's disheartening is that when the mountain flower's bloom remains trapped within the framework of this logic yet fails to grasp its essence. The film focuses narrowly on the injustices suffered by girls, portraying Principal Zhang as a beggar pleading for scraps, as if Huaping Women's High School's existence were a charitable concession by the patriarchal system. Meanwhile, outside the film, patriarchal groups actively demonize the school. Beyond their usual tactics, they exploit Pavlovian conditioning to manipulate public sentiment, reducing systemic critique to knee-jerk emotional reactions. As students from remote regions burning the midnight oil to compete for university spots in better resourced areas, we're no strangers to sacrifice. Yet patriarchal groups deliberately equate Huaping Women's High School with the militarized rigor of Hengshui High School, branding it a Hengshui model institution that tortures students with inhuman pressure. Moreover, since the school's approval came top-down, they weaponized the public's deep-seated distrust of bureaucracy, spinning narratives like, how much taxpayer money was wasted on this pet project? How many impoverished boys lost their shot at education just to curry favor with officials? Once they've mobilized the right interest groups, even outright lies gain traction, turning white into black through sheer repetition. The widespread circulation of such rhetoric precisely underscores the entrenched vitality of China's patriarchal forces. After all, a nation that rode its demographic dividend to prosperity would naturally foster powerful interest groups invested in maintaining this system. Their interests eroded by declining population growth and embittered by capitalism's cyclical crises, these men find common cause with the patriarchal, aggrieved and repressed, uniting to suppress women. If women won't bear children and create new consumers, then female degeneracy equals national collapse. Just as feminist ideas began gaining ground, media outlets seized the moment to scapegoat women, framing women's awakening as the root of men's suffering, and by extension, all women's misfortunes. Patriarchal groups fan the flames, leveraging every opportunity to justify female oppression, going so far as to howl, "See? This is why we can't let women have power." Even at fictional events like Yuwenjia's solar system broadcast in the Three Body problem, some women too join the chorus berating modern women for failing to endure hardship like they should. This reminds me of my grandmother. She told me that in her youth, her adoptive mother often beat her, scolding her for failing at household chores and not serving men properly. Be obedient. Submit to men. Devote yourself to your in-laws. Men crafted these shackles to suit their needs, then passed them down like a cursed relay baton, woman to woman, mother to daughter, until the festering wounds of wife-selling, female infanticide, human trafficking, and surrogacy spread like plagues. I am grateful to my grandmother. She never clamped those shackles onto me. She was always kind to me. Yet on her deathbed, during what seemed like a spirit possession, I learned she was never meant to be my grandmother. She was supposed to be a drowned infant. She survived only by chance, a last-minute rescue, paired with my great-grandparents' desperation for a child to continue the family line, secure their old age, and prevent lineage extinction. Logically, they should have adopted a son, but in a rural world without contraception and drowning in sun preference, Only baby girls were discarded or killed in bulk. They took me in solely to breed a son for them, Grandma said. Before her, her adoptive parents, my great-grandparents, had beaten an adopted daughter named Mei-ching to death. Only then did Grandma become their replacement. I'd rather have died in the wooden chamber pot at birth, she confessed, than endure a lifetime of blows as their tool. Fate relented when her second child, a brilliant boy, used education to escape poverty and lifted her with him. In her trance, Grandma demanded we honor Mei-ching in our ancestral rites, insisting I recognize her as my other grandmother. So now I have two, one murdered, who should have been my grandmother, and one bound to me by blood. Together they echo history's scars, and perhaps my own karmic roots. As someone who carries and bears witness to this pain, I've thought about giving voice to the grief and rage they never had the chance to express in their lifetime. Look at history. While patriarchal advocates preach filial piety as the highest virtue, they demand that women work as relentlessly as their mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers did, while also serving men unconditionally. They leave women struggling in the mire of bestial oppression, passing down these shackles generation after generation. They firmly believe that the dead must be respected, yet they use baby girl towers and iron chains to terrorize women, even though those burned alive or bound in shackles may include their own great-grandmothers, grandmothers, or the women who should have been their grandmothers, great-grandmothers, even their mothers and sisters. They shouted loudly that all problems are class problems, but then they colluded with capitalists and the bourgeoisie, excluding, besieging, and oppressing proletarian sisters. They boast of being naturally united and patriotic, yet relentlessly demean, slander, and vilify women in both language and public discourse. They claim that feminism is an invasion of foreign culture, and that women's fondness for wearing kimonos due to Japanese cultural influence is like a courtesan unaware of the hatred of a fallen nation, a sign of women's inherent lack of patriotism. However, they fail to notice that many men have long been influenced by Japanese culture and have secretly and extensively introduced works with problematic values, including content about rape, incest, and militarism. Even more, some men have imitated militarism and dressed up as the Nazi perpetrators who killed countless compatriots and martyrs for entertainment. These far more anti-patriotic cases are, however, tightly covered up. They proclaim they will liberate the whole world, yet defend the practice of buying women from poor countries, even eagerly seeking to participate, claiming, only women from impoverished places won't be picky or drag you to court. They weaponize the relative underdevelopment of other regions to trap their own female compatriots, even treating these places as exile zones to intimidate dissenters and those who dare resist. They claim that men bear heavier burdens than women, like not sending women to war, so it's only fair that men have more rights. They argue, women enjoy privileges from childbirth, yet still demand more while lounging on everything built by men, stirring up gender conflict. But women have fought in wars, whether in the Liberation War or ancient conflicts. History proves otherwise. War follows the rule of troops move only after supplies are secured. Logistics, production, and intelligence are critical, and women have played vital roles in these efforts. In the protracted battle of human civilization's development, women have never been absent. And why do wars even start? Isn't it just about overpopulation and seizing resources? Given that women cannot reproduce asexually and men, armed with overwhelming physical dominance and penetrative reproductive anatomy, monopolize the initiative in mating, have they upheld their so-called masculine duty of ensuring population growth aligns with environmental carrying capacity? Some even argue, women reap the benefits of demographic dividends, yet refuse to contribute to sustaining them, turning male taxpayers into victims. Too many figures like Zhang Guomei have created a surplus of leftover women. Female selfishness and widespread opting out of reproduction weaken population growth, dragging down the economy. Let it be known that it was men's greed in monopolizing inheritance and resources that bred the systemic neglect and slaughter of women in the old society. Take Qingdao, Shandong as an example. The 1936 census revealed women outnumbered by men by over 1/3. Yet despite being so vastly outnumbered and systematically weakened, these very women birthed what can only be called a demographic miracle. Throughout global history, most women have contributed fully to societal progress, while men, often succumbing to bestial instincts, became patriarchs. Wielding violence and rallying female enablers, they exploited women as a class, branding them the inferior second sex. Yet biologically, it is the male sex that emerges by shedding the capacity for gestation, making them the true second sex in origin. As human males, they are the ones privileged with exemption from the burdens of reproduction, whether it's bride prices, the so-called bitter oppression, lamented by patriarchs, or the sexual assaults, harassment, voyeurism, and misunderstandings that male-dominated circles frame as female conspiracies. Lu Xun captured their essence a century ago. A Q, who saw himself as oppressed, took out his frustrations by harassing the young nun for amusement, while onlookers roared with laughter. Later, consumed by thoughts of continuing his lineage and the need for a woman, he knelt to beg Widow Wu to sleep with him. Terrified, she raised a frantic alarm, drawing a crowd that drove A Q away and forced him to sign a pledge. Should any harm come to Widow Wu, A Q alone shall bear the blame. At first glance, A Q seems pitiable, wrongly accused. But precisely because countless men could, like him, casually grope a nun or accuse any woman walking outside of seducing stray men, because female victims were mocked into silence or driven to hang themselves to preserve chastity, Widow Wu had no choice but to react so fiercely to protect herself. In the end, that kick-downward cruelty of the kick-the-cat effect rebounded onto A Q himself, muttering, "Women are all treacherous creatures." He embodied a mentality unchanged in many today. Only now, the slander and fists rain down on women twice as hard. What a perfect example of later generations pitying the past but never learning from it. Combined with the previously mentioned offspring prosperity motherhood decline systemic model, the evolution of larger male and smaller female body sizes may itself reflect an inherent imbalance. When those exempt from reproduction doubly exploit those burdened by it, the entire species is accelerated toward collapse and chaos. Only external plunder can delay this trajectory. Thus, patriarchy is inextricably tied to imperialism, even militarism. This is precisely why humanity requires the restraints of responsibility, morality, and law to curb its own bestial instincts. To patriarchal ideologues, these constraints are nothing but shackles binding them. From resenting women's longer life expectancy to despising their higher education enrollment rates, even seething at sex workers out-earning men, they obsessively block any path where women might surpass them. Observe their giddy anticipation of Chinese women following Japan's trajectory, while fantasizing about receiving an enslaved woman as a coming-of-age gift, preferably without spending a single coin. Combined, their ultimate desire is to cement male domination, only by enforcing female dependence on their provision, demanding absolute obedience, and ensuring women bear greater survival burdens can they feel truly man, with their masculine dignity and existential purpose intact. So the male chauvinists love to hold up the banner of the heroic revolution. That's just to hide their true selves, the evil monsters like the devil dragon, in the works of the heroes, who would flood the Chantang Pass if they couldn't get their hands on young boys and girls. When that so-called sheltering arrangement for the female graduate student came to light, many argued that pairings of older bachelors with mentally ill women were common in their hometowns, claiming it was a win-win. The women got supervision, their parents were relieved of burden, the men gained sexual access, and society enjoyed stability. They insisted such practices should be encouraged, outright dismissing the possibility that the women's mental illness stemmed from rape and imprisonment by these men, now euphemized as sheltering by authorities. To them, even exposing such crimes was a waste of public resources. This is precisely how patriarchal networks sustain human trafficking. Lonely bachelors buy brides, sonless couples purchase boys, all with collective complicity. The moment you suggest rescuing trafficked women or executing male buyers, they shriek. 30 million single men will riot. Or just kill the women next time. Destroy the evidence, never let them escape. Holding society, especially victims of human trafficking, hostage like vengeful gods who will bring disaster to the area if not worshipped, wielding terms like poverty, rural hardship, and oppressed working-class men as socialist political shields to sanctify their atrocities. Not only that, they spread rumors that the victim's family was using her popularity to conduct live streaming sales, pushing the narrative that this mentally ill woman was abandoned, so she belongs with her captor. Others gleefully spammed comments like, "They were just dating," a deliberate jab implying, since the Tanju fat cat case verdict didn't satisfy men, Women shouldn't expect justice here either. Their reaction to surrogacy scandals follows the same script. Compared to the so-called liberation of all humanity, they seem far more obsessed with a world where women submit absolutely to men. They insist on framing women's current well-being as male benevolence, and declare that modern women, having failed to repay this debt, must now be punished. If this logic held, we'd have to admit one grim truth. Agency, even wrongful agency, has never truly belonged to women. In their infancy, political parties lacked resources, and the most oppressed under the old system, being the most abused and the easiest to satisfy, became perfect targets for recruitment by the new regime. But once that regime grew strong enough to no longer need their support, every promised reform evaporated. The dregs of the old system returned wholesale. Confucianism, once condemned as regressive, was resurrected with all its baggage, including the notions of children as property and women as servile objects, now institutionalized more firmly than ever. This is why patriarchy inevitably persists at scale, thriving across generations. Such a vast market is undoubtedly an irresistible piece of fat meat for capital, which is why human trafficking persists despite bans and surrogacy agencies are frequently exposed. This is the real reason behind the harsh sentencing of the driver in the Hualala case. Yet, male-dominated groups only clamor about the unfairness of the verdict, narrowly focusing on comparing the severity of punishments between male and female suspects, precisely proving the earlier conclusion. Patriarchal men only feel the superiority of masculinity and derive their self-worth from it when they witness women bearing survival pressures equal to or greater than their own. Their very existence depends on this hierarchy. They envy the not guilty verdict for the driver in South Korean woman's car jumping case. On its face, the ruling may seem unobjectionable. But when you consider how rarely they confront the entire profit-driven ecosystem targeting patriarchal clients, voyeurism, prostitution, human trafficking, and its concentrated threat to women's safety, their endless whining about the viciousness of women and feminists reveals its true motive. Everything must be twisted to dump both blame and responsibility onto women, erasing the historical truth that patriarchy itself is the root perpetrator. Whether through smears like white liberals or petty bourgeois, or verdicts designed to harm male interests while destroying female credibility, patriarchal forces will repeat these tactics relentlessly. Their goal? To normalize public indifference toward female victims, until the day comes when they can strike with impunity. In barely a century, history has circled back to the very horrors Lu Xun once documented. South Korea, as mentioned earlier, failed to achieve revolutionary transformation due to its geopolitical constraints, becoming instead a hybrid of feudalism and capitalism. Lacking a socialist framework, its developmental philosophy prioritizes producing humans for the sake of growth over growth for the sake of people. A truth exposed by atrocities like the Nth Room case and underage beauty pageants. Under the influence of a social hierarchy imported from China's feudal past, one that enforces rigid age/gender rankings and dehumanizes women especially, buying foreign brides to bear children has become the default solution for Korean men seeking marriage. Most trafficked women are smuggled from Southeast Asia. Without legal status, they're denied protection under Korean law. In these transactional marriages, they're beaten like slaves, even murdered and dumped. To the patriarchalists who scream about radical feminism, peddle conspiracy theories of false accusations, and fantasize about submissive wives, while preaching about seeing the world as it is, I ask, is this the future you crave? Patriarchal men recoil at the idea of letting women lead the world, irrationally, reflexively. Yet we have every reason to fear entrusting communism's future to certain men today. After all, on male-dominated online platforms, I've lost count of so-called masculine Chinese patriots who mock Japan, Korea, and India for their feudal backwardness and dehumanization, while voraciously consuming the worst cultural exports from those very nations. Games that simulate sniffing schoolgirls' uniforms or molesting teachers, forums where threats against women trend daily. They salivate over news of female victims, scream for duels to the death, fantasize about copying Japanese/Korean street violence against women, endangering public safety, and cheer for imperial expansion to claim foreign women. Their mentality aligns perfectly with 19th century colonial powers, yet they dare posture as revolutionaries. These exposed cases are just the tip of the iceberg. What's more terrifying? They still enjoy systemic privileges, inheritance priority, lower academic entry bars, hiring preferences, while wielding near-universal physical dominance over women. Even when not part of the elite, they're omnipresent. Their violence so normalized it's witnessed everywhere, casually. After a police officer drowned rescuing a suicidal woman from a river, minors immediately impersonated the woman online to smear the officer's sacrifice, stoking public outrage. This manipulation rallied netizens into a unified condemnation of all women, with calls to socially isolate them and nostalgic endorsements of the old oppressive order. Influential bloggers with massive followings amplified this frenzy, while viral misinformation, deadlier than any blade, systematically dehumanized women. Even when a trafficked foreign bride's escape remains unexplained, hordes rush to sympathize with her captors, spreading claims she scammed them for money. During raids against surrogacy rings, volunteers barely detain suspects before industry players call to negotiate, revealing not only prior surveillance of activists, but the terrifying entrenchment of these profit chains. It mirrors the Industrial Revolution. As a nation's military might grows, patriarchal forces inevitably shed their disguises. Wang Xianju, a researcher at the Runman University St. Petersburg State University Russia Research Center, openly asked a Kazakhstani state advisor during a conference, "How can we make female university graduates obediently and submissively bear children after graduation?" This reveals how those in power remain steeped in the very feudal rot denounced by revolutionary martyrs, and how young men eager to inherit such toxic ideologies now threaten both the legacy of those martyrs' ideals and societal safety itself. To persuade them to stop through reason, one must present facts and logic. Remember, while external contradictions provide the conditions for change, internal contradictions are the fundamental drivers of development. Gender, as an inherently unequal structural division, exacerbates imbalance within the human ecological niche, as previously demonstrated. Thus, women cannot be expected to willingly and submissively bear children unless, as history has shown and Beauvoir summarized, they are trapped in conditions where refusal means survival itself is impossible. Yet this doesn't just lead to the off-cited gender imbalance and social chaos. It fuels a rampant human trafficking industry. And these groups won't stop at mere profit. Patriarchy's rise fundamentally erodes global security. After all, if capital seeks to minimize the cost of human commodities, coercing women into submissive cross-border marriages, ask yourself, which is cheaper, liberating the world, or keeping it impoverished? Rather than confront reality, the self-proclaimed citizens of a responsible great power prefer chanting the old refrain, "Feminists are suicidal, look how much worse the West is." Even though the male-dominated society has oppressed women for thousands of years, leading to an imbalance in the male-to-female ratio, their first thought is still to bring in foreign women to balance the gender ratio and satisfy the insatiable desires of men. How would such a group, which has always treated their own women in this way, view foreign women whose ancestors once invaded their territory? A male-dominated group that has betrayed and deceived both their own women and the martyrs, and where such ideas as power comes from the barrel of a gun, and Jingfu women weep in terror, are so prevalent among the youth, what kind of truth would they create with their swords and long-range cannons? At this rate, the day may soon come when the women chained in sheds were not local faces, but foreign ones.